What's up, YouTube? Today what we're going to do is install a new rail that I've received from Templar Customs. It's a fast rail. Really good looking piece, but I thought this would actually be a good opportunity to go through a couple basic maintenance things that I don't really see being talked about too much. So predominantly what this video is going to focus on is not so much the rail install. I'll make another video for that. This is going to be the removal of a factory installed quad rail. So what we're looking at right here is my trusty Rock River Varmint. Great gun, had it for years, excellent shooter. It's been nagging at me for a little while because this Yankee Hill Machine rail I have on there, and had it on there since I bought the gun. I had it factory installed. It's just bulky and it's looking a little dated, and I think it's time for a change. Go with something a little bit lighter, a little bit more modern. And the fast rail I think will give me what I want in terms of functionality as well as how I want it to look. So really what we're going to talk about today is removing this rail. How you go about that step by step. Not a lot to it, but you know, it can be fairly difficult to do just by nature of how tight and set in things are going to get when they're put in from the factory. So with that being said, let's get right in it. So I guess first off what we'll talk about is basically how these free float rails are installed on AR15 platforms. Basically you have the rail itself, which basically is screwed on to a threaded barrel nut. The threaded barrel nut has some holes in it where you can index your gas tube, which we'll go through here in a couple minutes. And it also has a counteracting device or another threaded piece that once you have the rail threaded onto the barrel nut, you also have a locking nut which puts opposing force on it, which really sets everything deep in. What you also have is once it's indexed properly onto the nut that's supplied with whoever the manufacturer is, you usually have two keeper screws that index into the barrel nut itself. And as we disassemble everything, you guys will see that. But first thing we're going to want to do is go ahead and get this gas block off. Really simple to do. This is actually basically a fitted gas block that just has a couple set screws on the bottom. And one thing I will say is everything's been pre-loosened. If we run into a position in the video where I think something would have to be heated or another method applied to break it loose, we'll talk about that. I was just trying to, for the sake of time, have everything pre-broken so we can just get everything off without it being a 2-hour-long video. So first things first, let's get this gun flipped over and let's get this this gas block off. Alright guys, so first things first, this gives you a little bit of the peak of the barrel on these Rock Rivers. These are actually pretty interesting barrel profiles, so if you get to changing rails, food for thought, these are not profiled like you would see in a normal bull barrel. They start at 0.920 and then they flare up for the gas block and eventually go to 1.050, which is a pretty interesting profile. I actually had to get the barrel nut for the Templar install machine to make it fit. So these Rock Rivers are relatively unique. You may or may not run into that depending on what kind of bull barrel you have or if you're running a bull barrel at all. But to go into this step, what we're talking about, we're going to go ahead and break this gas block off. Like I said before, this is a rail gas block. What I'm wanting to do with the new install is install a micro gas block, something smaller that the rail can cover up. When I actually ordered this gun, I got it with the rail on it. This is a kind of a bulky block. Works well, no problems there. It's just from an aesthetic point of view, I'm not really pleased with how it looks, and it's time for a change. So normally these are Loctited in, relatively small set screws, so it's not too hard to get these off. And like I said before, everything was kind of pre-broken. I didn't have to apply any heat to this, so it'll come off pretty easy. There's two different types basically. Basically you have fitted gas blocks that are machined to work at your profile, be it a 920, an H-bar or a pencil barrel. Obviously this one is profiled for a bull barrel. There's also the clamp-on style, which are slit, which will fit on relatively within reason different profiles, and then you actually clamp them tight. I prefer this method that's fitted. It just works better. So we have these set screws broken, and basically once you have them enough where you know you're not touching the barrel anymore, it should allow you to begin to slide that forward. Alright, so we already talked about getting that gas block loose. We'll go ahead and slide that all the way off the barrel, and we can take a better look at this. As you can see, you have your gas block and your gas tube, and then the gas tube is held in place by a single roll pin. I'm not sure if I can get a good enough view there, but you can basically see the port right there that actually enters up and allows gas to enter the gas tube, which allows a gas impingement gun to basically fire. So what's happening here is expanding gases that are going down the barrel will go through that gas tube back towards the receiver, and that's what will actually cause your bolt to move back and forth under fire. So there we have it. So now at this point, we can go ahead and remove the bolts or the screws that are holding tension on this rail onto the barrel nut assembly. So basically one on each side. Just get that loosened up. You don't necessarily have to remove these all the way. You just want them to disengage. We'll get both of those off. And at this point, this should be free to rotate with the exception of this locking collar that would be holding forward tension on this rail, locking it in place. So we're going to loosen this up, back it off towards the receiver real quickly, and that should allow this quad rail to just thread right off. So now at this point we have everything loosened up. We have the locking ring backed out. I've already loosened up the quad rail most of the way, and you can just see the barrel nut utilizing these free floats is basically double threaded. You can see the open spaces here that the screws we spoke about before will lock that rail in. There's also potential for you to remove the barrel nut this way using a castle wrench or a castle nut wrench. I don't recommend that. I'll show you once we get this off really what you should use to get these off. When these are torqued on from a factory, they're usually on there pretty well, and they're Loctited. So if you're trying to use a less desirable method, chances of you getting hurt or damaging something are pretty high. So really quick, we'll just go ahead and get that quad rail all the way removed and get it out of the way. And now we're really left with the barrel nut. So now looking at the barrel nut, you can see the front where you have holes, and that's really the recommended method to remove this. Using a barrel wrench, you basically just index it into those holes, and having the right tool really make this job a lot easier versus trying to really use like a castle nut wrench. It's really not the right tool for the job. But like I said before, this was all pre-broken. So we can just real easily go in and start bringing it off. Now, one thing that you may have to do, which I actually had to do with this, is apply some heat. These thread onto the upper receiver, and they're usually Loctited. That's really the right method to do it. They're multi-torqued or step torqued to seat the threads, and Loctited, so they're pretty difficult to get off. A pretty smart thing to do is get yourself a pencil torch or a torch, heat it up to try and break up that Loctite. It'll just make your job a lot easier, and you won't run the risk of bending up your gun trying to break it. But luckily for us, this one's already loosened up, so we can go ahead and get that out of the way, and you can get a good idea of how your barrel seats in, as well as how we thread onto the receiver. So now that quad rail is pretty much removed, and that'll give you a good look at how these work. You can see how that threads onto your receiver, how the rail threads onto that, and again, the open spaces to allow your locking bolts to intercept. Now another thing that's kind of important, the reason these holes are drilled in here aren't necessarily so much for assembly and disassembly, but it's an index point for your gas tube to enter into the receiver. I'll get you guys a better peek of that so you understand what I'm talking about. Now as we spoke before, you can see where your gas tube enters into the receiver here. We also spoke about the actual the barrel nut and how your gas tube intercepts this and actually goes into the receiver. So this is, depending on what kind of rail you're installing, can be one of the more difficult points to get everything to index properly. That takes some finesse, and you may not always be able to get the exact torque specification you're looking for. But that's something that's, you know, always been going on. So if you're a couple pounds off, it's not the end of the world. I won't pretend like it is. So at this point, we still have our barrel seated. I'm going to try not to disturb that too much. And we're going to go ahead and get into the install of the new rail. So that's it for the disassembly of a free float quad rail. Thanks for checking it out, guys.